Hi, it's Jody Medell, Doctor of Physical Therapy and Transformational Coach, welcoming you back to another discussion on trauma and healing with a deep dive into understanding a little bit more about the inner critic. So in previous videos, I've described the inner critic as being the ego identity on drugs or the ego identity on steroids. And I need to clarify that a little bit because it's a little too simplistic and it doesn't really, it's not helpful, I guess is the bottom line. It's helpful to the extent that it talks about ego identity as being separate. It's us versus them. And the inner critic definitely brings that out, the I versus you, or that separatization. But it's way more than that when we talk about the ego identity. And I really believe that part of the healing actually is to take that inner critic, take some of the power away from it so that we can do a better job of understanding our ego identity. So what do I mean by that? It's a little bit jumbled there. Let's just talk about the ego identity. The ego identity is neither positive or negative. It just is. The ego identity expresses who we are in this 3D world on planet Earth. And it's our definition of self. It's how we perceive ourselves as we compare ourselves to others. It's defined by our memories. It's defined by the society we live in, our value system, what we like and what we don't like. It's the tags we label ourselves with. I am a mother. I am an athlete. I am an entrepreneur. It helps us describe how we fit in to societal norms based on what we perceive our world to be. And it's, again, neither positive or negative. In a sense, the positive aspects of it are that it gives us a sense of self, and so we can use that self-esteem or that sense of self to set a goal and accomplish it. It also keeps us safe if we're looking on the positive end of things. It's our ability to make sense of where we fit in our environment. Is this environment safe? Do we need to run away from it? Do we need to stay here? It's really just our understanding of how we reside in this body, right? And what we do with it. On the negative side, we can get super attached to our ego identity, how we describe ourselves, and that attachment can then limit our ability to go beyond how we've identified who we are. So if we want to look at positives and negatives, then, there's a shadow side to everything, and there's a positive side or a more, a brighter side, lighter side to everything. And so same with the ego. It's us giving it that positive or negative. The ego identity in and of itself is neutral. So I want to set that stage because when we talk about the inner critic to me, now that I understand it more, is basically taking on some of the negative aspects of that ego identity and having it take over our definition of self. All right? So anything that's positive about that ego identity seems to fall short or go to the wayside as that inner critic, which is made up of our memories, our experiences of trauma in our childhood. It takes over and it defines who we are in the negative because it is made up of our experiences. It's made up of our memories, and those experiences and memories are loaded with traumatic experiences. So the inner critic really builds up self-attack, shame, blame, and negativity about ourselves. And it's that inner critic that drives us down that rabbit hole into a negative self-concept of who we are. And so we don't feel like we're worthy. We don't feel like we can accomplish things in life because we don't deserve it. And that then takes over how we define ourselves in our ego identity. I hope that makes sense. The healing in all of that is understanding that that inner critic is just a voice that's been created in response to the trauma. It's trying to keep us safe. It's trying to direct us. It basically becomes our parent when we don't have parents that take care of us, right? So when we've been ignored, when we've been left, when we've been on our own, and as a child trying to make sense of life, the inner critic thinks its job is to take over and direct us. But based on the external cueing of negativity, the inner critic then tells us that we're to blame. It tells us that we're at fault. It tells us that we are always short of what we need to do to be better. And so with the inner critic, we never win. We never make strides in the right direction. And when that becomes the ruler of our life and how we define ourselves, it takes us down the rabbit hole. And the healing of that is the awareness that that is false. That is not truly who we are. And so when we can look at the inner critic as simply being an aspect, a piece of our ego identity, we can pick it apart and we can work on it and we can bring it into a more positive light, out of the shadow side into the lightness, to help define who we are and why we're here. Now I'm going to take this a step further. The issue with the ego identity is that it falls short of connecting us to the divine, to the collective, to all that is. The ego identity does keep us separate. It's really how we define self in this human body on planet Earth in this 3D world. It doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't have to be how we view the inner critic. It can truly be positive. As I said before, our understanding of self can allow us to set goals and achieve them. It allows us to figure out and make sense of how we fit in society, what we came here to do. It allows us to give validity to the things that we choose to focus on and accomplish in this lifetime. But again, it keeps us as our own separate unit. It doesn't allow us to step back and see how we fit into, again, the larger piece, the collective, the whole. So in the next discussion, I want to go another step further and separate out inner critic, which is, if we're going to look at positive and negative, it's more or less the heightened negative aspect of our ego identity. Then we have our ego identity, and then we have ourselves as the observer. When we're able to step back and see our soul, why we came here, our spirit self, and how that resides within this human body that we claim as our ego, right? Our ego identity. But how does spirit then sit back in all that and make sense of who we are in this lifetime as it relates to the collective, the whole, the divine, and ultimately why our spirit chose to come in, reside here, and what it came to learn and do and be in this lifetime. So I hope this makes sense. It's a little complicated. I don't mean it for it to be, but I think it's really important that I don't leave you thinking that the inner critic is simply the ego identity on steroids. That's just too short of a description, and it's too simplistic, because the ego identity is neutral. It's not positive or negative. It's simply how we define ourselves in this 3D world living in this body. And the inner critic is taking that aspect into the negative and filling us with blame and shame and guilt, and it's based on the trauma that we've experienced and our need to basically have create our own parent that gives us that negativity and that driver. So the work here again is to look at that inner critic, re-regulate the inner critic itself towards neutrality, so that we can define ourselves in our ego identity as all-encompassing, both positive and negative, all aspects of self, not just the shame, blame, guilt aspect of self. And then looking at the ego identity and how it fits into our physicality, our body, and then bringing in the spirit that connects us to all that is, to divinity, to the collective. All right, that's a lot of stuff. Chomp on that for the next week. And then next week, I'll be back with a little deeper dive into being the observer, which is bringing in our spirit self into this body, this ego identity, and what that's all about. Okay, have a fabulous day. We'll talk soon. Thanks.